Hey guys, Bryan here from Liquid Concepts. So today we're going to talk a little bit about how long does hydrographics take to do. Now, that is a very open-ended question, but we're going to try to go through and show you guys a few things on what you can do, as well as, of course, how you can get faster with some of your turnaround times. So, first question is going to be how long does hydrographics take? Now, this question, of course, is very open-ended depending on what all you're using, the products and the materials and things like that, but let's just kind of break it down. So normally in hydrographics, you have 3 to 4 different processes that you need to do. Number 1, of course, you need to prep it. Number 2 is going to be the primer. Number 3 is going to be the paint. Number 4 is going to be, of course, the dipping itself. And then, of course, you have to have a clear coat over the top of it. So definitely, of course, 5 different things that you're normally going to have to use to go through that entire process. Now, that can be done very quickly, or it can also be done very extensively depending on the amount of work that's going to be needed for that process in itself. So let's kind of break this down a little bit and look at how long each of those processes may take, as well as what you can expect on going from start to finish on getting an entire part done with the hydrographics. So step number 1 is going to be the prep work. Now this can of course be very open-ended, but of course prep work is going to be mainly the sanding, the sandblasting, doing any prep work that's going to be needed, cleaning the part off, things like that. Most of the time you can expect to be somewhere around 5 to 20 minutes on a part like this whenever you're doing any type of prep work. Step number 2, that's going to be the priming process. So once you've got all of your parts prepped out, then you're going to come through and spray the primer. Now the primer, it can be very quickly sprayed, but of course you're going to have to mix it up and get everything ready to go. So of course, prepping out your spray area, you're going to get everything set up, blown off, cleaned off, tack rag, anything like that. And then of course, mixing up your primer. So mixing up your primer, you're probably gonna need at least 3 to 5 minutes to make sure that you get everything mixed up correctly, shook up correctly, hooked onto the gun, ready to spray, set the gun up, make sure everything's good. And then of course, spraying the part. Spraying the part's gonna be the quickest part of the whole deal, mainly a couple of minutes. So pretty much right now, we're up to about 30 minutes or so on just from the prep work to the priming process itself. Step number 3 is going to be your painting. So the painting is going to be very quick, very simple. Of course, if you need to mix up your paint, then you'll give yourself a couple of minutes for that. And then of course, the same amount of time for the priming as it is in the painting. It may be a little bit more in case you need to spray a few extra coats on it to get full coverage, but all in all, the priming and the painting is going to be very similar. So let's add another 10 minutes to that just to make sure that we have plenty of time for everything. So now we're up to about 40 minutes. Now, once we've got the paint already painted, now we can let it sit, let it dry, maybe give it another 10 minutes or so, and then bring it into the dip room and have it ready to go for the dipping. So of course, the dipping is very simple. We have 1 minute on the clock, and then of course, after that, we take and we dip the part into the water. So we've got about 10 minutes all together. So that's going to be a couple of minutes to get the film laid out on the table, cut out, ready to go, picked up, brought over here, and of course laid down into the tank. Then once we got it in the tank, we're gonna let it sit for about 1 minute on the water, spray our activator, and then dip the part. Of course, after the dipping, we have to rinse it off. Rinsing is pretty simple, it's pretty easy. It's mainly just more time consuming than anything. So let's just say that we've got maybe another 5 to 10 minutes in the rinse. So of course, overall, about 10, maybe 15 minutes total for the dipping, the cutting the film, and the rinsing process. Now, of course, with this right here, we can either let it air dry or we can use compressed air to, of course, dry it off very fast. So let's just say that we use compressed air, we dry it off, couple of minutes, and so now we're up to about 15 minutes or so total for the dipping process itself. So now from our 40 minutes, now we're up to about 55 minutes, let's say ballpark average about an hour. And so after that, then once everything's dried off, everything's dipped, everything's ready to go, now we're ready to clear coat. So of course, with the clear coat, all we're gonna do on that is same thing with our primer, same thing with our paint. We're going to mix it up and then of course put it in the booth, spray it, and then now we have a fully finished part. Again, we'll give ourselves about 10 minutes for that one part, and then so ballpark about an hour and 15 minutes if you want to kind of just do an average of that. So then that way from start to finish, we're looking at ballpark about an hour and 15 minutes. Now, a lot of the customers are probably asking us, well, why do you have such long turnaround times? Now, again, there is a lot of steps in there that, of course, we did not account for. And so a lot of those could be waiting for the paint to dry, or waiting for the primer to dry, or waiting for a flash time, or waiting for anything, you know, even if you let your part dry overnight or something like that. Those can be a lot of different times that you can get for doing the hydrographic process. So with something like that, you also got to, as I was saying before in the very first of the video, you got to take that with a grain of salt in knowing that it could take a lot longer, it could take a lot less, just depending on how you're moving forward, and of course what part that you have and what all prep work, paint work, dipping, and all of that is going to be needed. So of course, as you can tell, the dipping does not take very long, but I'm sure you've probably already contacted a couple of companies, maybe even us included, and we have much longer turnaround times. We may have 2 weeks, we may have 4 weeks, we may have 6 weeks. And so a lot of the customers are like, well, why does it take that long if it only takes this long to do a project? So let me kind of break it down. A lot of the times whenever we're doing other jobs, we have tons of other things that we're doing. And so for us as a business to make it profitable, we have to batch things in certain batches. And so whenever we're getting everything ready to go and we're about to spray a batch of primer, we may mix up everything all at once and spray one batch of primer to be able to spray all of our pieces all together at one time. Now that saves us a lot of time and a lot of money because we're only turning on the booth one time, and of course we're also making it to where whenever we're doing all of our jobs, we're only having to mix up primer once instead of multiple times. With us, we do a lot of different jobs and we have a lot of different clientele that want a lot of different stuff. And so of course with our jobs and with our processes, sometimes some things take longer than others. We may budget for 3 hours to do this job, but in reality it took 5. And so sometimes that happens and we get behind. Other times we may budget for 5 hours and it only takes 1 hour, and that's great. But it's always a give and take on a lot of these jobs because each job is always custom, each job is always individual, and each job is always a very unique, one-of-a-kind job. And so that's what makes it really interesting for us because it is always something different. It's always something very unique. So in saying all that, what should you expect from a company to do a hydrographic job? Now, that's going to be very open-ended because of course we don't know how long or what their turnaround times are or even what jobs that they have. I would say the average turnaround time for most companies is probably going to be anywhere between 2 to 6 weeks. Now, that may be a lot longer than what you might need, and you might also talk to them to see if they have a quicker turnaround time, but to do the job the right way, to do a really good professional job, we feel like having the job and having the ability to have at least 2 to 6 weeks is more than sufficient time. Now, of course, if you have contracts or anything like that, that time may be extended out even longer if you have a lot of jobs going on at one time. But ballpark from what we've seen in the past and what we've talked to a lot of our other customers, normally around 2 to 6 is probably the going average on what most companies are running for the turnaround times to give you a fully finished, one-of-a-kind work of art from what you just dropped off 2 to 6 weeks ago. So hopefully this video has really helped you guys out. Of course, if you have any questions or comments, definitely leave them below. We'd love to hear from you on anything hydrographics related, as well as if you have any questions on turnaround times, definitely let us know on that. We'd love to hear from you. Also, if you've seen some crazy turnaround times or had some stories of maybe some quick turnaround times or even longer turnaround times, definitely let us know on that. We'd love to hear from you on that. I'm Bryan from Liquid Concepts, and this is how we customize your world. We'll see you guys next time.